Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates spent their weekends at shopping malls and slumber parties, Sarah could be found at the local gym, pushing herself through grueling workouts that would make grown men wince. Her father, a retired Army sergeant, had taught her that strength came not from avoiding challenges, but from meeting them head-on. At 18, when most of her friends were heading to college or settling into quiet jobs, Sarah made a decision that shocked everyone who knew her. She walked into the Marine Corps recruitment office on a sweltering July morning, her chin held high and her mind made up. The recruiter, Staff Sergeant Johnson, looked up from his paperwork with barely concealed surprise. "You sure about this, miss?" he asked, his weathered face creasing into what might have been concern or amusement. "The Marines isn't exactly a summer camp." Sarah's brown eyes never wavered. "I'm sure, sir. I want to serve my country, and I want to be the best." The road to becoming a Marine was everything Sarah had expected, and more. Boot camp at Paris Island was a crucible that broke down everything she thought she knew about herself, and built her back up into something stronger. She endured the screaming drill instructors, the impossible physical challenges, and the constant pressure, with a determination that impressed even her toughest critics. During those grueling months, Sarah earned the respect of her fellow recruits through her unwavering commitment and her refusal to quit, no matter how impossible the task seemed. When others stumbled during the long marches, Sarah would quietly help them keep going. When someone struggled with their equipment, Sarah would offer assistance without being asked. She never sought recognition for these acts of kindness, but her fellow Marines noticed. After graduation, Sarah was assigned to Camp Pendleton in California, where she joined the 1st Marine Division. The adjustment from boot camp to regular military life was significant, but Sarah threw herself into her duties with the same intensity she brought to everything else. She volunteered for extra training, studied military tactics in her spare time, and quickly established herself as someone who could be counted on in any situation. Her platoon sergeant, Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, was a 20-year veteran who had seen hundreds of young Marines come and go. Most of the time, he could predict within a week who would thrive and who would struggle. Sarah intrigued him because she seemed to possess an inner drive that couldn't be taught or faked. "Martinez," he said to her one morning after a particularly challenging training exercise, "you've got something special. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Those words meant more to Sarah than any medal or commendation ever could. She had found her place in the world, and she was determined to make the most of it. The opportunity Sarah had been preparing for came 18 months into her service, when her unit received orders to deploy to Afghanistan. The mission was described as routine support operations, but everyone knew that in a war zone, routine could become deadly in the blink of an eye. Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as she prepared for her first deployment overseas. The flight to Afghanistan was long and uncomfortable, but Sarah used the time to mentally prepare herself for what lay ahead. She thought about her training, her responsibilities to her fellow Marines, and the trust that had been placed in her. As the transport plane descended through the dusty Afghan sky, Sarah felt ready for whatever challenges awaited her. Forward Operating Base, Wolverine, was a collection of concrete barriers, prefabricated buildings, and guard towers rising from the desert like a modern fortress. The base housed nearly 3,000 American and Allied personnel, all working together to support various military operations throughout the region. Sarah's unit was assigned to convoy security, a job that required constant vigilance and split-second decision-making. The convoys were lifelines for the smaller outposts scattered throughout the province, carrying everything from ammunition and medical supplies to mail from home. Each mission was a calculated risk, as the roads were often targeted by insurgents using improvised explosive devices and ambush tactics. Sarah quickly learned to read the landscape for signs of danger, to trust her instincts, and to work seamlessly with her team. During her first month in Afghanistan, Sarah participated in dozens of convoy missions without incident. She began to feel confident in her abilities and her place within the unit. Her fellow Marines had come to rely on her sharp eyes and steady nerves, and she had earned their respect through her competence and reliability. The mission that would change everything began like any other. It was a clear Tuesday morning in October when Sarah's convoy received orders to escort a supply truck to a remote outpost near the Pakistani border. The route was familiar, and intelligence reports suggested minimal threat levels. Sarah checked her equipment methodically, as she always did, and took her position in the lead vehicle. The convoy consisted of 4 heavily armored vehicles carrying 12 Marines and 1 Navy corpsman. Sarah was the gunner in the lead vehicle, responsible for watching the road ahead and providing covering fire if needed. As they left the relative safety of the base and ventured into the open desert, Sarah felt the familiar heightening of her senses that came with potential danger. For the first hour, the mission proceeded without incident. The landscape rolled by in a blur of brown earth and scattered rocks, broken occasionally by small villages or nomadic herder camps. Sarah maintained her vigilant watch, scanning for anything that seemed out of place or potentially threatening. The attack came without warning, as they always did. Sarah was scanning a cluster of buildings ahead when the world suddenly exploded around her. The lead vehicle struck a massive improvised explosive device buried in the road, and the blast lifted the multi-ton armored truck several feet into the air before slamming it back down onto its side. The explosion was followed by intense gunfire from multiple directions as insurgents opened fire from concealed positions. Sarah found herself trapped in the overturned vehicle, disoriented and struggling to understand what had happened. Pain shot through her left leg and arm, but adrenaline kept her focused on the immediate danger facing her team. Through the smoke and dust, Sarah could hear her fellow Marines calling out positions and returning fire. She knew that every second counted in a situation like this, and despite her injuries, she fought to free herself from the wreckage of the vehicle. The metal frame had twisted around her leg, and each movement sent waves of agony through her body. "Martinez! Martinez! Can you hear me?" The voice belonged to Corporal Davis, her vehicle commander, who had managed to escape from the wreckage and was now trying to provide covering fire while helping his trapped teammates. "I'm here," Sarah shouted back, her voice barely audible over the sound of gunfire. "My leg is caught, but I can still fight." With Davis providing cover, Sarah managed to work her way free from the twisted metal, though the effort cost her dearly. Her left leg was clearly broken, and her arm hung at an unnatural angle. Blood ran down her face from a gash across her forehead, but her mind remained clear and focused. The firefight lasted nearly 2 hours, with Sarah and her fellow Marines holding their position until reinforcements could arrive. Despite her serious injuries, Sarah continued to operate her weapon and coordinate with her team. Her training and determination overriding the pain that threatened to overwhelm her. When the dust finally settled and the area was secured, Sarah was evacuated to the base hospital for emergency treatment. The medical team worked quickly to stabilize her injuries, but the damage was extensive. Her left leg had been shattered in multiple places, requiring several surgeries to repair. Her left arm had suffered severe nerve damage, and the head wound had resulted in a mild traumatic brain injury. As Sarah lay in the hospital bed during the following days, visited by her commanding officers and fellow Marines, she began to understand the full extent of her injuries. The doctors were honest with her about the long road to recovery ahead, and the possibility that she might never return to full active duty status. But what hurt more than the physical pain was the reaction of some of her fellow Marines when they thought she couldn't hear them talking. In the hallways outside her room, she overheard conversations that made her heart sink. "Poor Martinez," one voice said. "She was a good Marine, but she's done now. No way she comes back from injuries like that." "Yeah, it's a shame," another replied. "But maybe it's for the best. Combat isn't really a woman's place anyway. This just proves it." The words stung worse than any physical wound Sarah had endured. She had given everything she had to earn her place among these Marines. And now, some of them were ready to write her off because of circumstances beyond her control. The laughter and dismissive comments she occasionally heard from the hallway made her feel more isolated than she had ever felt in her life. But Sarah Martinez had not come this far by giving up when things got difficult. As she lay in that hospital bed, surrounded by the sound of medical equipment and the distant noise of base operations, she made a promise to herself. She would prove them all wrong. She would show them that her injuries did not define her, and that her service to the Corps was far from over. The doctors told her that her recovery would take months, possibly years. They warned her about the permanent limitations she would likely face, the chronic pain she might have to endure, and the career limitations that lay ahead. Sarah listened to every word, nodded politely. She requested every piece of literature about injury recovery and rehabilitation that the base library could provide. She studied physical therapy techniques, learned about adaptive technologies, and researched other service members who had overcome similar challenges. If knowledge was power, then Sarah was determined to become the most powerful person in that hospital. When she was stable enough to begin basic physical therapy, Sarah attacked her rehabilitation with the same intensity she had brought to her original Marine training. The therapists were amazed by her determination, even as they worried about her pushing herself too hard too soon. "You need to pace yourself, Marine," the head therapist, a former Navy corpsman named Peterson, told her during one particularly intense session. "Recovery is a marathon, not a sprint." Sarah paused in her exercises and looked at him with eyes that burned with determination. "With respect, sir. I've been running marathons my whole life. This is just another race." As word of Sarah's remarkable progress spread throughout the base, she began to attract attention from the medical staff, her fellow patients, and eventually, the command structure itself. Her story became a source of inspiration for other injured service members. And her positive attitude, in the face of overwhelming challenges, impressed everyone who met her. But Sarah knew that inspiring people wasn't enough. She needed to prove that she could still perform as a Marine, that her injuries hadn't diminished her value to the Corps. She needed to show them all that Sarah Martinez was still a force to be reckoned with. The opportunity would come sooner than anyone expected, in a way that would test everything she had learned about herself and her capabilities. And when that moment arrived, even those who had laughed at her injuries would be forced to admit that they had underestimated the heart of a true Marine. The weeks that followed Sarah's decision to fight back were some of the most challenging of her life. Physical therapy sessions that should have taken her months to complete, she compressed into weeks through sheer force of will. Every morning at 0500, before the official therapy sessions even began, Sarah could be found in the rehabilitation center, working on her mobility exercises and strength training. Her left leg, held together with titanium rods and screws, screamed in protest with every step. The nerve damage in her arm meant that simple tasks like gripping a water bottle or writing her name required tremendous concentration and effort. The traumatic brain injury left her with occasional dizzy spells and memory lapses that frustrated her beyond words. But Sarah refused to let these setbacks define her recovery. Chief Petty Officer Williams, the senior medical administrator overseeing her case, had seen many injured service members during his 22-year career. Some fought hard and made remarkable recoveries. Others seemed to give up before they even started. But he had never seen anyone approach their rehabilitation with the systematic intensity that Sarah brought to every single day. "Martinez," he said to her one morning as she completed what should have been an impossible set of exercises for someone at her stage of recovery. "You're pushing yourself beyond what most people would consider reasonable. Are you sure you're not doing more harm than good?" Sarah paused her workout and looked at him directly. "Sir, with respect, reasonable isn't what got me through boot camp. And it's not what's going to get me back to my unit. I know my body, and I know what I'm capable of." Williams had to admire her determination, even as he worried about the physical and emotional toll she was taking on herself. He made a note in her file about her exceptional progress, but also his concerns about her refusing to acknowledge her limitations. The other patients in the rehabilitation ward began to take notice of Sarah's routine. Some were inspired by her dedication and asked to join her in her early morning sessions. Others seemed almost resentful of her progress, as if her success somehow highlighted their own struggles. Sarah was always willing to help anyone who asked, sharing techniques she had learned and offering encouragement when others felt like giving up. Specialist Rodriguez, an Army soldier who had lost his right leg to an IED blast, initially resented Sarah's presence in the ward. He had been there for 6 months, making what the doctors considered normal progress. When Sarah arrived, and immediately began pushing boundaries that he had accepted as fixed. "Some of us don't have the luxury of being able to push ourselves like you do," he said to her one morning, his voice carrying a note of bitterness. "Some of us have real injuries to deal with." Sarah stopped her exercises and looked at Rodriguez with a combination of understanding and firmness. "Every injury is real, Rodriguez. Every person's pain matters. But that doesn't mean we have to let our injuries become our identity. We're still soldiers. We still have value. We still have something to contribute." 17. One of the tenables of some were 17. Her words hung in the air between them for a moment before Rodriguez looked away. That afternoon, he quietly asked if he could join her morning workout routine. Within a week, he was pushing himself harder than he had since his injury, inspired by Sarah's example of what was possible with determination and hard work. As Sarah's physical condition improved, she began to face a different kind of challenge. The medical board that would determine her fitness for continued duty was approaching, and the rumors about her case were spreading throughout the base. Most of the talk was sympathetic but pessimistic. Even her supporters seemed to assume that her military career was effectively over. Captain Morrison, her company commander, visited her regularly and was always encouraging about her progress. But Sarah could see in his eyes the same assumption that everyone else seemed to share. He was proud of her recovery, but he clearly expected her to accept a medical discharge and transition to civilian life. "Sarah," he said during one of his visits, "I want you to know that whatever the medical board decides, you've already proven yourself to be an exceptional Marine. Your service record speaks for itself, and your recovery has been an inspiration to everyone who's witnessed it." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied carefully. "But I hope you know that I'm not planning on going anywhere. I still have work to do as a Marine." Morrison's expression grew concerned. "Sarah, I admire your spirit, but you need to be realistic about what's possible. The Corps has programs to help injured Marines transition to civilian careers. There's no shame in accepting that your military service has reached its natural conclusion." 2. After Morrison left, Sarah felt more isolated than she had since her injury. Even the people who cared about her and respected her achievements seemed convinced that her career was over. The weight of their low expectations felt heavier than all the physical pain she had endured during her recovery. That evening, as she sat alone in her room, Sarah made a phone call that would change the trajectory of her recovery. She called her father, the retired Army sergeant who had taught her that challenges were meant to be overcome, not surrendered to. "Dad," she said when he answered, her voice thick with emotion, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Always, sweetheart. What's on your mind? Do you think I'm fooling myself? Do you think I should accept that my military career is over and move on with my life?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When her father spoke again, his voice carried the same strength and conviction that had guided Sarah throughout her childhood. "Sarah, I've watched you overcome every obstacle that life has put in front of you since you were old enough to walk. You didn't become a Marine because it was easy. You became a Marine because you knew it would be hard, and you wanted to prove that you were up to the challenge." "No, sir. Then why would you stop now?" The only person who gets to decide when Sarah Martinez is finished being a Marine is Sarah Martinez herself. Everyone else is just noise. Those words gave Sarah the strength she needed to continue pushing forward, even when it seemed like the entire world was against her. She threw herself back into her rehabilitation with renewed purpose, but she also began to prepare for the next phase of her plan. Sarah knew that recovering from her injuries was only part of the challenge she faced. She also needed to prove that she could still perform the duties required of a Marine in combat conditions. That meant she needed to pass the same physical fitness tests, weapons qualifications, and tactical exercises that every Marine was required to complete. The problem was that her doctors and commanding officers were reluctant to allow her to attempt these tests. They worried about liability, about setting unrealistic expectations, and about the potential for further injury if she pushed herself too hard, too fast. Sarah decided to take matters into her own hands. Using her access to the base training facilities during off hours, she began secretly testing herself against Marine Corps standards. She started with the basic physical fitness test, timing herself on the run despite the pain in her leg, and pushing through pull-ups and crunches that left her exhausted but determined. Her first attempts were disappointing. Her run time was significantly slower than the minimum required standard, and her pull-up count was well below what she had achieved before her injury. But Sarah had expected this. She knew that recovery was a process, and she was prepared to work as long as it took to reach her goals. Week after week, month after month, Sarah continued her secret training regimen. Slowly but steadily, her times improved, and her strength returned. The physical pain remained constant, and there were days when she wondered if she was asking too much of her damaged body. But each small improvement felt like a victory, and each victory motivated her to push harder. The breakthrough moment came during a late-night training session in the base gymnasium. Sarah was working on her pull-ups when she suddenly realized that she had exceeded her pre-injury personal record. The accomplishment hit her like a physical shock, and for a moment she hung from the bar in stunned disbelief. But her celebration was interrupted by the sound of slow clapping from the entrance to the gymnasium. Sarah dropped from the bar and turned to see Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, her old platoon sergeant, walking toward her with a mixture of admiration and concern on his weathered face. "I've been wondering why the gym equipment was getting so much use during the midnight hours," Rodriguez said, his tone carefully neutral. "Should have known it was you pushing the limits again." Sarah felt a moment of panic, wondering if she was about to be disciplined for using the facilities without proper authorization. "Gunny, I can explain." Rodriguez held up his hand to stop her. "No need to explain, Martinez. I've been watching your recovery from the beginning, and I've been hearing the talk around the base. Some people think you should accept your limitations and move on. Some people think you're pushing yourself too hard and risking your long-term health." He paused and looked at her directly. "But some people think you might just be crazy enough to prove everyone wrong. The question is, what do you think?" Sarah straightened her shoulders and looked her old platoon sergeant in the eye. "I think I'm still a Marine, Gunny, and Marines don't quit." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "That's what I was hoping you'd say, because I've got some news that you're going to find very interesting." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an official-looking document. "There's a new program being implemented by Marine Corps headquarters. It's designed to evaluate injured Marines for possible return to limited duty status. The program includes comprehensive fitness testing, weapons qualification, and tactical exercises." Sarah's heart began to race as she realized what Rodriguez was telling her. The program is voluntary, and the standards are exactly the same as they are for any other Marine. No accommodations, no special considerations. You either meet the standard, or you don't. He handed her the document. "Your name has been submitted for evaluation. The testing begins in 2 weeks. The question is, are you ready?" Sarah looked down at the paperwork in her hands, hardly believing what she was seeing. After months of being told that her career was over, that she should accept her limitations and move on, she was finally being given the chance to prove what she had always known in her heart. "Yes, Gunny," she said, her voice steady and strong. "I'm ready." Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah's training intensified to a level that worried even her most supportive advocates. She knew that she would only get one chance to prove herself, and she was determined to make the most of it. Her secret training sessions became longer and more demanding. But now she had the added motivation of knowing that an official evaluation was coming. The news of Sarah's participation in the evaluation program spread quickly through the base, generating intense interest and speculation. Some people were genuinely excited to see what she could accomplish. Others remained skeptical, believing that the program was more about public relations than actual fitness for duty. The most vocal skeptics were a group of Marines from another unit who had arrived at the base after Sarah's injury. They knew her reputation as a wounded warrior who had shown exceptional courage during the attack on her convoy, but they had only seen her during her recovery period. To them, she was a symbol of damaged goods, someone who should be honored for her service, but not expected to return to active duty. "It's not that we don't respect what she did," Sarah overheard one of them saying in the mess hall. "But there's a difference between being a hero and being fit for duty. The Corps isn't a charity case." Another Marine nodded in agreement. "Exactly. And all this attention she's getting is just going to make it more embarrassing when she fails the evaluation. Someone should talk to her about accepting reality." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Corporal Davis, Sarah's former vehicle commander, who had witnessed her actions during the convoy attack firsthand. "You gentlemen want to know about reality?" Davis said, his voice carrying an edge that made the other Marines shift uncomfortably. "The reality is that Martinez saved 3 Marines' lives during that firefight, including mine. She did it while her leg was broken and her arm was hanging useless at her side. So maybe you should wait to see what she can do before you decide what she's capable of." The exchange highlighted the division of opinion that existed throughout the base about Sarah's upcoming evaluation. The people who had served with her before her injury remained confident in her abilities. Those who had only known her as a wounded Marine were more skeptical about her chances of success. Sarah was aware of the speculation and debate, but she tried to stay focused on her preparation. She knew that talking about what she might be able to do was meaningless. The only thing that mattered was what she could actually accomplish when the moment came to prove herself. 3 days before the evaluation, Sarah was summoned to meet with the base commanding officer, Colonel Matthews. She had never spoken directly with the colonel before, and she wasn't sure what to expect from the meeting. Colonel Matthews was a career Marine with 30 years of service and multiple combat deployments. He had a reputation for being tough but fair, and for making decisions based on what was best for the Corps, rather than what was popular or easy. "Sit down, Martinez," he said when Sarah entered his office. "I wanted to talk to you before this evaluation begins." Sarah took a seat across from the colonel's desk, maintaining the rigid posture that was expected during formal military meetings. "I've been following your recovery since you were injured," Matthews continued. "Your progress has been remarkable, and your determination has impressed everyone who's worked with you. But I want to make sure you understand what you're asking for." He leaned forward in his chair. "This evaluation isn't a feel-good exercise or a public relations stunt. The standards you'll be held to are exactly the same as those applied to every other Marine in the Corps. If you fail to meet those standards, your military career will be over. There won't be any second chances or special considerations." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I understand, sir." "Do you?" Matthews asked. "Because I've seen a lot of good Marines over the years who let their pride convince them to attempt things that were beyond their capabilities. There's no shame in accepting that your service has taken a different direction. Sir, with respect, I didn't ask for special treatment or second chances. I asked for the opportunity to meet the same standards that every Marine is expected to meet. If I can't do that, then I don't deserve to wear this uniform." Colonel Matthews studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Martinez, I hope you're as ready as you think you are." As Sarah left the colonel's office, she felt the weight of expectation and skepticism pressing down on her like a physical force. In less than 72 hours, she would either vindicate everything she had worked for or face the end of her military career in the most public way possible. But Sarah Martinez had never backed down from a challenge in her life. And she wasn't about to start now. She had spent months preparing for this moment, and she was ready to show everyone exactly what a Marine could accomplish when they refused to accept defeat. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just Sarah's future, but also challenge everyone's assumptions about courage, determination, and what it truly meant to be a Marine. The morning of the evaluation arrived with the kind of crisp desert air that made everything seem sharper and more intense. Sarah woke at 0430, 2 hours before her normal routine, unable to sleep any longer. She had been dreaming about the convoy attack again, but this time the dream had been different. Instead of the explosion and chaos, she had dreamed about standing strong and proving herself worthy of the uniform she wore. As she prepared for the day ahead, Sarah took a moment to look at herself in the mirror. The scars from her injuries were still visible, thin lines across her forehead and arms that told the story of what she had survived. Her left leg, though now strong enough to carry her weight, would never be quite the same as it had been before. But her eyes held the same determination that had carried her through boot camp, through her deployment, and through the long months of recovery. The evaluation was scheduled to take place at the base training facility, with multiple testing stations set up to assess different aspects of Marine Corps fitness and readiness. Word had spread throughout the base about what was happening, and Sarah knew that she would be performing in front of an audience that included both supporters and skeptics. At 0600, Sarah reported to the designated staging area, where she met the other Marines who were participating in the evaluation program. There were 8 of them in total, all recovering from various injuries sustained during their service. Some had been wounded in combat, others injured during training exercises, but all were hoping for the chance to continue their military careers. The evaluation team included medical personnel, fitness instructors, and senior Marines who would assess each participant's performance. Sarah recognized most of the faces, including Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez and Chief Petty Officer Williams, who had supported her throughout her recovery process. But there was one face she hadn't expected to see. Standing off to one side, wearing the unmistakable stars of a general officer, was Brigadier General Patricia Hawkins, the commanding general of the entire Marine Corps base. Sarah had never met the general personally, but she knew her reputation as a demanding leader who expected excellence from everyone under her command. The presence of such high-ranking leadership made it clear that this evaluation was being taken seriously at the highest levels of the Marine Corps. Sarah felt a mixture of pressure and excitement, knowing that her performance would be observed by someone whose opinion could influence the future of the entire program. The first phase of the evaluation was the standard Marine Corps physical fitness test. Each participant would be required to complete pull-ups, crunches, and a 3-mile run within specified time limits based on their age and gender. There would be no accommodations for injuries or disabilities. The standards were the same as those applied to every Marine in the Corps. Sarah watched as the first few participants attempted their evaluations. Some performed well, meeting or exceeding the minimum requirements. Others struggled, their injuries limiting their ability to complete the required exercises. Each failure was met with respectful silence from the observers, but Sarah could sense the growing skepticism about the program's viability. When her turn came, Sarah approached the pull-up bar with steady confidence. She had practiced this moment thousands of times during her secret training sessions, and she knew exactly what her body was capable of accomplishing. The nerve damage in her left arm still caused occasional weakness, but she had learned to compensate through technique and determination. She gripped the bar and began her first repetition. The movement felt smooth and controlled, exactly as she had practiced. The second pull-up followed, then the third. By the time she reached 10 repetitions, she could hear murmurs of surprise from some of the observers who had expected her to struggle. But Sarah wasn't finished. She continued past the minimum requirement, reaching 15 repetitions, then 20. When she finally dropped from the bar after completing 23 perfect pull-ups, the testing area had fallen completely silent. General Hawkins, who had been taking notes on a clipboard, looked up with an expression of surprise that she quickly concealed behind a professional mask. Sarah had just completed more pull-ups than many uninjured Marines could manage, and she had done it with an arm that doctors had once thought might never regain full function. The crunches portion of the test proceeded similarly. Sarah's abdominal strength had actually improved during her recovery, as she had focused heavily on core exercises to compensate for the instability in her injured leg. She completed the required 100 repetitions in well under the time limit, then continued for an additional 25 repetitions just to demonstrate that she had reserves left. But everyone knew that the real test would be the 3-mile run. Sarah's leg injury had been the most severe of her wounds, and running had been the most difficult aspect of her recovery. The doctors had warned her that she might always experience pain and stiffness during sustained cardiovascular exercise. As Sarah lined up at the starting line with the other participants, she noticed that more people had gathered to watch this portion of the evaluation. Word had spread about her performance on the previous exercises, and Marines from throughout the base had found excuses to be in the area during her run. Among the crowd, Sarah spotted some of the Marines who had been most vocal in their skepticism about her abilities. They stood with arms crossed, watching her with expressions that suggested they expected this to be where her impressive performance would finally falter. The starting signal was given, and Sarah began running at a pace that she had calculated during her training to be sustainable for the full 3 miles. Her left leg immediately began to ache, a familiar pain that she had learned to accept as part of her new reality. But the pain was manageable, and her conditioning was solid. As the run progressed, Sarah found herself settling into a rhythm that felt natural and strong. Her breathing remained controlled, her pace remained steady, and her confidence grew with each completed lap around the track. The other participants were spread out behind her, some keeping pace, others falling back as they struggled with their own physical limitations. By the second mile, Sarah had pulled ahead of the other runners and was maintaining a pace that would easily meet the time requirement. But more importantly, she was running with a fluidity and strength that surprised even her most optimistic supporters. The months of secret training had paid off in ways that were now becoming apparent to everyone who was watching. General Hawkins had moved closer to the track and was observing Sarah's performance with an intensity that made it clear she was seeing something unexpected. As the commanding general of the base, she had reviewed Sarah's medical records and recovery reports. She knew the extent of the injuries that had been sustained, and she understood the medical assessments that had suggested Sarah's career was likely over. But what she was witnessing contradicted everything she had been told about Sarah's limitations. This Marine was not just meeting the minimum standards required for fitness, she was exceeding them by margins that would be impressive for any Marine, regardless of injury history. As Sarah began the final mile of her run, something remarkable began to happen. The Marines who had gathered to watch began to cheer and offer encouragement. Even some of those who had been skeptical about her chances started calling out words of support. "Come on, Martinez. Show them what Marines can do. Bring it home." The encouragement energized Sarah, reminding her of why she had worked so hard to reach this moment. She was not just running for herself, she was running for every injured Marine who had been told that their service was over. She was running to prove that determination could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. With a quarter-mile remaining, Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of maintaining her steady pace to ensure she met the time requirement, she began to accelerate. Her injured leg screamed in protest. But she pushed through the pain and began running faster than she had run since before her injury. The crowd's cheering grew louder as they realized what she was doing. Sarah was not content to simply pass the evaluation. She was going to dominate it. She crossed the finish line with a time that was not just acceptable, but exceptional. Her run time would have been competitive among uninjured Marines, and it was achieved by someone who had been told less than a year ago that she might never walk normally again. As Sarah slowed to a walking pace to cool down from her run, she noticed that the entire testing area had fallen silent again. The Marines who had gathered to watch were staring at her with expressions ranging from amazement to disbelief. Even her strongest supporters seemed stunned by what they had just witnessed, but it was General Hawkins' reaction that made the biggest impression on Sarah. The commanding general was standing motionless, her clipboard forgotten at her side, watching Sarah with an expression of profound respect and admiration. When their eyes met across the testing area, the general nodded slowly, a gesture that conveyed more approval than any words could have expressed. The silence was finally broken by the sound of applause that started slowly with one person and quickly spread throughout the crowd. The Marines who had come to watch were acknowledging not just Sarah's performance, but the demonstration of courage and determination they had just witnessed. But the evaluation was not yet complete. The physical fitness test was only the first phase. Sarah and the other participants still needed to demonstrate their proficiency with weapons and their ability to perform tactical exercises under simulated combat conditions. The weapons qualification took place at the base firing range, where each participant was required to demonstrate proficiency with both rifle and pistol. Sarah had been concerned about this portion of the evaluation because the nerve damage in her left arm sometimes affected her ability to maintain steady aim for extended periods. But when she took her position at the firing line and began engaging targets at various distances, her marksmanship proved to be as sharp as ever. The months of rehabilitation had actually improved her shooting stance and technique, as she had been forced to find new ways to compensate for the limitations in her injured arm. Her final score on the weapons qualification exceeded the minimum requirement by a substantial margin, earning another round of surprised murmurs from the observers. Sarah was not just meeting the standards required for return to duty. She was performing at a level that would be considered exceptional for any Marine. The final phase of the evaluation was a tactical exercise designed to simulate combat decision-making and leadership under pressure. Each participant was given a scenario involving a small unit patrol that had encountered enemy contact, and they were required to demonstrate their ability to assess the situation, make appropriate tactical decisions, and communicate effectively with their team. Sarah's scenario involved a convoy that had been ambushed, a situation that was uncomfortably similar to her own combat experience. But instead of being traumatized or overwhelmed by the parallels, Sarah found that her real-world experience gave her insights and confidence that served her well during the exercise. She analyzed the tactical situation quickly and accurately, identified appropriate courses of action, and communicated her decisions with clarity and authority. Her performance during this phase of the evaluation was so impressive that even the exercise controllers, experienced Marines who had seen hundreds of similar demonstrations, were taking notes on her techniques and decision-making process. When the evaluation concluded, Sarah stood with the other participants while the assessment team reviewed their scores and prepared their final recommendations. She felt confident about her performance, but she also knew that the decision about her future was no longer in her hands. General Hawkins approached the group of participants and addressed them collectively before announcing individual results. Her voice carried the authority and respect that came with decades of military leadership. "Marines," she began, "what I have witnessed today has exceeded my expectations and challenged my assumptions about the limitations that injuries might place on a Marine's ability to serve. Each of you has demonstrated courage simply by participating in this evaluation, and you should be proud of your commitment to the Corps." She paused and looked directly at Sarah. "However, one performance today has been so exceptional that it requires special recognition." The general stepped in front of Sarah, and the entire crowd fell silent again. "Marine Martinez, your performance during this evaluation has been nothing short of extraordinary. You have not just met the standards required for return to active duty. You have exceeded them in every category." Sarah felt her heart racing as she absorbed the magnitude of what she was hearing. "Furthermore," General Hawkins continued, "your demonstration of determination, resilience, and commitment to excellence represents the highest ideals of the Marine Corps. You have proven that the measure of a Marine is not whether they have been knocked down, but whether they have the courage to get back up and continue fighting." The general's voice became more formal as she announced her decision. "Marine Martinez, you are hereby recommended for full return to active duty status, with no limitations or restrictions on your service. Additionally, I am recommending you for promotion and assignment to a leadership position where you can share your experience and expertise with other Marines." The crowd erupted in applause and cheering that seemed to echo across the entire base. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes, but they were tears of joy and vindication rather than sadness or pain. She had done it. She had proven to everyone, including herself, that her injuries had not defined her or limited her potential as a Marine. But what moved her most was seeing the reactions of the people who had doubted her. The Marines who had whispered about her limitations and suggested that her career was over were now applauding her success. Some looked embarrassed about their previous skepticism, while others seemed genuinely inspired by what they had witnessed. Corporal Jenkins, one of the Marines who had been most vocal in his belief that Sarah should accept medical retirement, approached her after the ceremony. His expression was one of humble acknowledgement of his error in judgment. "Martinez," he said, extending his hand, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong about what you were capable of, and I'm proud to serve in the same corps as you." Sarah shook his hand and smiled. "No apology necessary, Corporal. We're all Marines here, and Marines look out for each other." As the crowd began to disperse, and Sarah started to walk back to her quarters, she was approached by General Hawkins, one final time. The commanding general had waited until they could speak privately before sharing her final thoughts about what she had witnessed. "Martinez," she said, "in 30 years of military service, I have seen many examples of courage and determination. But what you accomplished today was something different. You didn't just overcome your injuries. You transformed them into a source of strength." The general paused, as if considering her next words carefully. "The Marine Corps needs leaders who understand that true strength comes not from avoiding challenges, but from facing them head-on and refusing to surrender. I believe you have an important role to play in teaching that lesson to other Marines." As General Hawkins walked away, Sarah stood alone for a moment, reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The pain in her leg was still there, as it always would be. The scars on her arms and face would never completely fade. But these physical reminders of her injuries no longer seemed like limitations. They had become symbols of her resilience and her refusal to accept defeat. 6 months later, Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez stood before a group of Marines at the base training facility, leading a workshop on overcoming adversity and maintaining readiness despite physical challenges. Her promotion had come through, along with her assignment to the Wounded Warrior Battalion, where she worked with other injured Marines who were fighting to continue their service. In the audience were Marines at various stages of their own recovery journeys, some just beginning their rehabilitation, others preparing for their own evaluations. Sarah looked at each face and saw reflections of her own determination and hope. "The question isn't whether you'll face obstacles," she told them, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had proven her words through actions. "The question is what you'll do when those obstacles try to convince you that you're finished." She gestured to her own scars and the slight limp that remained from her injured leg. "These marks don't define what I can't do. They remind me of what I've already survived and overcome. They're proof that I'm tougher than anything life has thrown at me so far." In the back of the training room, General Hawkins watched silently, having stopped by to observe Sarah's work with the wounded Marines. The commanding general had seen many remarkable transformations during her career. But Sarah's journey from wounded warrior to inspirational leader represented something special. As Sarah concluded her presentation and began working individually with Marines who had questions about their own recovery processes, General Hawkins reflected on the lesson that Sarah had taught everyone on the base that day. True strength was not the absence of injury or weakness. True strength was the refusal to let those challenges become excuses for giving up. The Marines who had once laughed at Sarah's injuries and questioned her future now spoke of her with the highest respect. She had become a legend on the base, not because of what she had survived, but because of how she had chosen to respond to survival. And in the quiet moments when Sarah worked one-on-one with Marines who were struggling with their own recoveries, she would often share the most important lesson she had learned. The Corps doesn't need perfect Marines. It needs Marines who refuse to quit. Sometimes, the ones who have been broken and healed are the strongest of all. The laughter that had once greeted her injuries had been replaced by silence filled with awe and respect. Sarah Martinez had proven that a Marine's true strength was not measured by what knocked them down, but by their determination to stand back up and continue the fight.